Cool. Okay, so this should be recording. I'll obviously cut out this terrible intro when I come on to edit. So we're on episode 2 of the Flat White Chronicles, and I welcome on Shannon Beer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So just to give the listeners a brief introduction of who you are and what you currently do for work.
Sure. So similar to Johnny, I am also an MNU graduate. We were both from the same intake and graduated in November of last year. And I currently work as a nutrition coach for Flat Success, who are a team of coaches based in Australia. And they kind of handle a range of clients like powerlifters. I predominantly work with general population. I've got a couple of powerlifters as well. We do fighters, bodybuilders, and we just coach people online basically for whatever their goals are. Similar to you, it's a very individualized process. It just works really well online with Skype calls, check-ins weekly, and it takes people from where they are to where they want to be. So it's really rewarding, I think. It's a nice job.
Nice. And I just want to tell the listeners now who are listening to the audio only that Shannon is currently you're in Bali right now, right?
Yeah, I am.
and she's currently sat within a spa. And so the background music that you might be hearing is not my working music of choice. It's actually because Shannon's in Bali in a spa right now. So, I mean, obviously the listeners can tell from your accent that you are from the UK. As you said, you and I were on the same intake together with Mac Nutrition Uni. So how did you find yourself working then for an Australian company?
Yeah, so towards the end of studying with Mac Nutrition, I took a working visa, went to Australia and spent about 10 months based in Melbourne, Sydney, on the Gold Coast as well. And funnily enough, I was just walking home from the gym, scrolling through Instagram as you do, and I saw a job advertisement for an online coaching position. And it's pretty much everything that I was already doing, but working with a well-established team. And I knew a few people who'd been coached by Flex in the past, asked a few people what they thought of them, and got a feel for it. And just applied for the job through that. And luckily enough, they took me on board. And now we're here.
Cool. Yeah, nice. And I mean, it lends itself quite well now to obviously the topic of this podcast in terms of being able to travel and then either maintain or even build on your physique goals, either be that weight loss, muscle gain, or a combination of both. So obviously you come from a good position because you're currently within that position as well. Like you find yourself in Bali, but yet you're technically home based in England, but your job's based in Australia. So just tell the listeners a little bit, I guess, about like your travels over the last few months, like the different cities you've been to, different countries you've been to as well. Sure.
So I left the UK last April, I believe. Went to Thailand, Vietnam, Bali, then I flew to Australia, so Melbourne, Sydney, Gold Coast, Singapore as well, LA. I came back home, went to Dublin. Where else have I been? Hong Kong recently, Naples. Now I'm in Bali, going back to Australia. So a few places.
Yeah, it sounds hectic for someone like myself who's very much into his routine of life. It sounds kind of. I mean, I did a small bit of traveling, but nothing as much as that. So I mean, talk to. I guess the best place to start is the misconception that a lot of people come to me with. I guess holidays are very different to traveling, but if you are to go away and travel for an extended period of time, let's say, as you said, 6 to 12 months, people can visit multiple different countries across Asia and South America are sort of two of the most well-traveled places. You also have Australia as well. What would be how have you managed, I guess, to balance your training and lifestyle alongside your work, and then also making sure you experience the countries that you find yourself in?
Yeah. So I think you make a very good point about distinguishing between travel and holiday, because I would take a slightly different approach if I was just going on holiday for a short period of time. That's different to having to, keep things on track if you're traveling for longer periods. And so when it comes to that, I think common misconceptions are people assume that they can't work out, that the food's going to be a bit of a challenge, whereas in reality, if you just, what it comes down to is planning, mostly planning in advance. I think the longest period I went without training when I was traveling was 4 days, and that was because I was on an island in Vietnam and there wasn't a gym on the island. Other than that, there's been gyms pretty much everywhere I've gone, whether that's like a very rustic like Muay Thai gym with dogs. Like I've trained with dogs running around in the background, and just with one like old rusty kettlebell and some really light dumbbells. I think you've got to kind of have a good base to be able to be flexible. So I think the more you know, the more alternatives there are, and you can work around whatever situation you find yourself in. When it comes to food, I think it's finding the balance between enjoying the cuisine of wherever you are, because that's a huge part of traveling for me, is trying the different foods. I'm a massive foodie. I want to try, all the different cuisines, like Vietnamese, Thai food. Like, these are some of, in my opinion, like some of the nicest cuisines that you can try, and also so different for me being from the UK, And I think it's being realistic, but also kind of prioritizing. So knowing that you kind of want to stay, or you don't want to let go completely, but also it's just a part of life and you do want to enjoy yourself. So I think knowing your own balance is particularly important. As I say, I'm not going to go to these places and then be worried about trying the cuisine, or worried about how much protein's in my meal necessarily for every single meal. It's finding the balance between getting it right and doing what you would usually do, and then knowing when to indulge or when to try something different, regardless of whether or not it's optimal.
Yeah. I mean, you made a lot of good points there. Like, the first differentiation to make is the fact that like a holiday and traveling are very different things. Like, if you're going on a holiday and your point is to get out of normal routine and relax, then it's like you can kind of put the brakes a little bit on food and exercise, but it doesn't mean that you completely let yourself go or eat to excess just for the sake of it. And then so with traveling, it's that mindset of, actually, this is going to be my lifestyle now for a long period of time. So I need to be able to adapt to what I've got in front of me. We can talk a bit about nutrition in a second, but in training in particular, there you mentioned about, there was pretty much every city that you went to had a gym, apart from that one time when you were on an island. And even if you wanted to say, okay, I'm not going to go 4 days without moving at all on this island, I'll do some body weight exercises, maybe some circuits potentially. But you did mention there about, it was like the more that you knew, the more you could adapt. So I guess for people who are listening to this, it's worth saying to them, okay, well, you're either going to need to educate yourself a little bit better within the training sphere, or hire someone who can help you, or make sure that you've got a great sense of Googling like travel workouts and things like that, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Was on that island for 4 days. I did do a makeshift body weight workout in my hostel room. So there was, push-ups. I did rows from the bed frame, like body weight rows, pull-ups on the bed frame. Like, if you can get inventive, And another tip is to carry around. So I carry around a skipping rope because it's very light. It doesn't take up much room in my suitcase, and I know then that I can get a little bit of cardio in wherever I am. I've done a workout again in a hostel in Hong Kong. Nobody was in the room, so I was like, right, I'm going to whip out the skipping rope, and here we go. Just like 20 minutes, just to be able to move. And you've always got the option of going for a run. It's hot in these places, so morning or evening would be preferable. But there's always something you can do to stay active.
Yeah, I think that's the key message, is that there's always something that you can do, and if you're telling yourself you can't, then it's more of your own limiting factor than actual reality. Talk a little bit about, you said that there was pretty much a gym in every country. So, when I went over to Australia, it was easy for me to either drop into a CrossFit box, or I could talk to the people very easily from like a Globo gym and get day passes because there was no language barrier. So, I mean, talk a little bit about traveling somewhere like Asia and then trying to navigate either different gyms and getting in for like maybe just a day, or, or however long you're going to be there. What does that look like?
So I did have a very funny experience with this in Vietnam. I was in Hoi An, and it was the first time I was looking for a gym there, and I stumbled across this very, very old gym full of Vietnamese men. They were all quite small, And I just walked up and they were all looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I think it was pretty obvious, I was dressed in activewear. They knew why I was there. But everyone was definitely a bit confused. But I think most people have they know numbers. So if you just present some cash, they're going to let you in. I think it's more so having the guts to do it. And to being prepared and finding these places. And I think that's so much easier if you establish a good routine whilst you're home. So this is something that I teach to my clients who do travel regularly. It's the more we can do whilst you're at home, you're going to have those good habits. So for me, when I'm traveling now, it's quite natural for me to think in advance and look for a gym, do a bit of research and plan when in the day I'm going to go as well, because obviously if you're with people, you don't want to miss out on whatever's going on. So you might need to work around things like that. But a bit of planning and preparation, that goes a long way. And I think, as I say, having that routine established before you go, it's gonna help you out massively. Trying to kickstart a healthy routine whilst you're traveling, that's very hard.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. It's having that baseline level of habits, because then you're actually more likely to want to work around your whatever's coming up in front of you. Whereas if you're going away traveling and you don't really go to the gym that much already, and you're not actually that bothered about nutrition, then trying to adopt that while traveling in a kind of like, in a way to prevent damage or whatever, it's probably going to be quite a lot harder. As you said, it's funny because a lot of people might listen to this and say, oh well, when to dictate your hostels around gyms and stuff like that, is that not a little bit sad? But I guess it just depends on what your priorities are.
Yeah, I mean, normally I would book the accommodation first, and there tends to be a gym nearby. I think because most places, even in like Southeast Asia, there's a huge community of travellers anyway, so they do accommodate for people like that. In Chiang Mai, there's a very popular gym called Go Gym. It's pretty much where everyone goes. So there are like well-known kind of places. We just do a little bit of searching. And it's very easy to find places to go. I don't think it's the gyms that are the problem, even though, as we said, there may be a lack of equipment, but you can work around that as well. You could do full body workouts with just dumbbells. I think the main issue is for people is running out of time, not taking care of themselves, so they feel tired and struggling to push themselves to go to the gym, or struggling with a lack of motivation and feeling like they're on holiday when perhaps they're not.
Yeah, massively. I think that's a great point. The whole idea of, if you're going traveling for extended period of times, these places look after you, or they accommodate for a lot of people because everyone does it. So actually, if you get in the right circles almost and talk to the right people, you'll be able to find the right places to go, and there'll be plenty of people doing the same thing. So I guess it also depends on who you find yourself socializing with when you're traveling as well.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I met some girls from Canada whilst I was in Thailand, and one of them said that she was massively into the gym, as part of her routine while she was at home. But with her friends, she'd been traveling for a couple of months and hadn't worked out since she left. And then we met her. Obviously, I was going to the gym regularly anyway, just because, going backpacking for a couple of months, I'm not going to not work out. And then she got back into the habit of it. Like, it's just finding the right people, or just having that drive yourself to go, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it can be very hard, I guess, if you're traveling with a bunch of people who aren't into that routine, to then to be the odd one out and just sort of jump apart. But again, I guess it comes down to that idea of if it's important to you, and if you're potentially working with a coach as well, and you have that accountability to help with. So I think that's it moseys quite well onto now, like nutrition. A lot of people worry about food when they go away just because they're out of their routine. And I think a lot of people probably worry a bit too much, because we have this perception in today's age that like anything that we don't prepare at home isn't potentially as good as something that we can find outside, which is just backwards, as we know. But so just tell the listeners a little bit, I guess, about how you've managed yourself in terms of nutrition. You talked earlier about trying this cuisine, but tell us about what habits have you found yourself putting in place so that you can manage your body weight effectively while still doing that sort of guilt-free?
Sure. Well, I think there's a difference between managing your body weight and then trying to strive for optimal health / even muscle gain, because staying the same body weight, that's fairly easy in terms of you just need to maintain energy balance. So you can implement strategies such as fasting. There's all those tricks when eating out, making sure that your food's not fried, or if you are having fried rice somewhere, which is pretty common, making sure your next meal is something lighter, things like that. That's going to come down to having a good base knowledge of what's typically used when you're cooking out. So for example, actually, I did some cooking classes whilst I was in Bali, Thailand and Vietnam. So you can see what goes into the food. And even myself, who I would consider to have obviously a decent foundation of knowledge, I wasn't aware of things like they do these like fish stick things in Indonesia, which I would assume is pretty much just fish, but a lot of oil and other things go into making it stick on the stick, I don't know. And having seen it cooked, even knowing that chefs use a lot of oil, like actually making it myself is a real, realization of just how much goes into each dish. So I think, that's a handy tip for people if they are traveling and they've got the time and want to experience it. Do a cooking class and you'll see how the food's made. Things like curries as well, a lot of them use coconut milk, so being aware of that, because if you're, otherwise unaware, you might think, oh, chicken and vegetables and rice, that's pretty healthy, but without realizing that, high fat coconut milk is going to add on to the calories pretty easily. I think knowing that the majority of meals out are probably going to be slightly lower in protein than what you're used to consuming, because portion sizes of meat, maybe smaller than what you cook for yourself. So again, having that baseline knowledge of recognizing what a typical portion is for you, and then compare that against what you're served in the restaurant to know whether that's roughly similar to what you would have, or if it's slightly less. As I said, you can do intermittent fasting, but for me now at the moment, I'm focusing more so on muscle gain, because that's just my goal for myself at the moment, which means strategies like intermittent fasting probably not ideal, because I want to be consuming protein regularly throughout the day. So carrying around, I've got my protein do 250 gram bags of weight. You don't need to carry around a massive kilo tub of it. But having that in the morning just to get that one serve of protein in, and then saving my carbs and fats for my meals out. So I'll potentially do 2 or 3 meals out a day, especially because it's so cheap here in Bali, it's pretty easy to find decent options. But having that protein serve in the morning just to ensure that I'm getting some in there, and I could even potentially have another shake in the evening if I thought I didn't get my protein in for that day. And finding the options when you're out. So looking for lean sources of protein, knowing that it's probably going to be marinated in something that will contain oil potentially, or cooked in oil either way. So things like chicken, fish, those are all decent options. I also like going for a lot of the raw options, so like sashimi, ceviche, like raw fish, raw beef, because then it hasn't been cooked in anything for a start. Asking for dressings and things on the side. I think it's just knowing that unless you make modifications to the meal, it's likely to be fairly high fat. And for me personally, I perform better on a higher carbohydrate, moderate fat intake and a higher protein intake. So trying to find those options when you're eating out, that's what I'm aware of. So knowing what to look for and knowing kind of your macros, I think is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. And you said a lot of good things there. I think it comes down to a lot of formal education from the first start. And I think it also comes back to that point of if you're going to be traveling, then setting up some habits before you go is going to be best, because then you have this awareness of what's in food. You mentioned some good points about weight maintenance being different to muscle gain. Muscle gain clients are probably going to be a little bit less conscious too much of calorie intake, because they're going to be wanting to get the protein in and make sure that they're weight training. That's going to have to be their priorities. Whereas I guess maybe a fat loss client or a maintenance client, someone who wants to just maintain their progress, they're going to be using things like intermittent fasting, being aware of the fat content of meals, potentially lowering their carbohydrate intake to accommodate for those calories. And then I guess it's just that it's that self-discipline to be right, okay, I'm going to have this high calorie meal, so I need to make the next meal a lot low calorie, or I'm going to skip it, or find another alternative, and have that plan in place that can be, flexible, I guess.
Yeah, I think it comes down to knowing what your goal is, having a clear idea of that, whether it's fat loss, maintenance, or muscle gain, knowing the options available to you as well, like easy options that are available in most places. Like you can get chicken breast, you can get tuna in the supermarket. In terms of like just optimal health, you can always find vegetables and fruit everywhere. Even in the supermarkets, if you don't have access to cooking facilities, there are fruit, vegetables that you can eat raw. Carrots, tomatoes, cucumber. Those are all options that are better than nothing. And just recognizing that, when you're eating out, it's likely that the servings of vegetables probably are going to be less than what you require. So yeah, just knowing what's available and having those go-tos and being prepared as well. Like if you're traveling for a short period of time, you can buy things like jerky or protein bars, as I say, the whey, and take those with you, and creatine, that you can still bring some supplements with you. All this stuff is quite easy to manage if you know what's available to you.
Yeah, it comes down to knowing what's available, having strategies and a plan, I guess, doesn't it? And not a rigid plan, but in terms of that flexible plan that can be adjusted. And then I think it comes down a lot to trusting in that plan and knowing that'll be enough. I think with the conversations that I've had with clients around holidays and traveling, it becomes more of a convincing attitude of like, no, it's okay. Like these things are going to be enough for you to be able to maintain weight loss, or build muscle while still enjoying yourself. You don't have to have one or the other.
I think it's also important to be realistic with your expectations. So, for example, if I've got a fat loss client who is going on holiday rather than travel, and they've already made good progress, be realistic. Why not take the week or so as a maintenance week? You don't need to be losing weight every single week in order to, have consistent progress. So I think being realistic with things like that, even for myself, as I say, my goal at the moment is to build muscle, but I know what's optimal, and then I know what's practical for me whilst I'm traveling. And obviously I'll aim for optimal, but if I can only achieve what's practical, and fall short slightly. So for example, yesterday I took a Muay Thai class because I really enjoy them, and I skipped my actual resistance workout, so my volume would be slightly lower overall this week, but I'm okay with that. So I know that, if I really wanted optimal progress, I'd make sure to get all of my sessions in every single week consistently. But I'm not that bothered. So I think having, a realistic expectation is just going to go a long way, because otherwise people get frustrated and then they completely give up.
Yeah, you made a couple of great points there. That first point about being obviously realistic with what you can achieve, and that point about like you don't need to be losing weight all the time if you're a fat loss client, and if you're out on holiday or even traveling, it's like, okay, well, can you have a diet break for the week? Let's focus on maintenance. Let's focus on enjoying it. That break, physically and psychologically, we know can actually benefit further fat loss phases, as opposed to, people get so scared that they're just going to put all the weight back on. And it's like, no, if we focus on maintenance, not gain, then you'll be fine. And you might a couple of pounds might manifest on the scale because of water weight and bloating from travel and carbohydrate, alcohol, that kind of thing. But it's just reassuring them that that's not fat gain. And then that point of being practical about what you can achieve while traveling for long periods of time, that's fantastic. I think from a fat loss perspective, again, it's like your progress might be slower just because your food isn't going to be optimal, but at least you're doing what you can and you're enjoying it and you've got a good balance. So it's like, what would you rather have? Would you rather give up and, gain 2 stone and be miserable? Or would you do what you can, achieve what results you can, still enjoy yourself, and then come back and then get back on it?
That's the thing. It's all about trade-offs at the end of the day. Like if you're, traveling with some friends, and so for example, again, at the moment, I'm here in Bali with some friends and they're here on holiday, whereas I'm, traveling such and not actually on holiday. We're going out eating, drinking, having desserts. and it's up to you to pick and choose, you know, when you'd like to indulge and when not to. So again, being like practical and realistic, I could be indulging every time they indulge because, you know, if I wanted to, it's there, but also I can choose not to. So I think having that option and knowing what it is you want, just keeping that perspective, I think that's important as well. And planning in advance. So my client who travels fairly regularly, we've done things such as implement more aggressive cuts in the periods of time that he's at home, because he might have a schedule coming up where he's literally flying around every couple of weeks. So if he's got a 2-week period where he's at home and in control of every meal, then we can take advantage of that, go fairly aggressive with his deficit so that he doesn't need to be in such an aggressive deficit whilst he's away, which would be much easier to achieve and maintain, but then his progress on the whole is still a good rate that he's happy with. So it's all things like that I think planning and preparation really come into it.
Oh yeah, massively. And it's the attitude toward that as well. The planning and preparation is one thing. And then just the attitude to be like, okay, it's not gonna be completely devastating. I'm going to be able to manage it somehow. I just need to be aware that that conscious choice that you make as well when you're with other people. You have that choice whether to indulge in that food or not. And actually, it comes back to that same point I mentioned earlier, where especially British people and westernized population, we have a kind of feeling of enjoyment means gluttony. It's like, I'm only enjoying myself if I'm shoving my mouth full of food, because that's not what I normally do. And all of this food is available to me. It's all exotic. What if it's never here again type thing? And I guess it's trying to overcome that urge.
Yeah, and just, you know, even strategies like mindful eating, so just taking your time when you're with, if you're, you know, if these foods are present and you don't necessarily want to go overboard, you do want to enjoy yourself, and just take your time and putting your cutlery down between mouthfuls, you know, eating slowly, things like that will make a huge difference. I've actually done studies showing that people are no less satisfied for eating less than eating more if you're taking your time to kind of enjoy the food. You know, eating more doesn't necessarily lead to extra satisfaction in all cases. So I think being aware of that as well and just enjoying it for what it is. Like, food is a huge part of it, but it's not the only part. So when you are eating out, you know, if it's a social occasion, why not focus on the people that you're with and enjoying your time rather than, you know, being entirely food focused. I think having that kind of striking that balance between enjoying yourself and taking your time and then, you know, enjoying the moment as well, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, exactly. And the mindful eating thing is something I've teetered in and out of before, and it's something that I'm using more and more with clients these days, especially when they're away, especially when they're at parties, social occasions, that kind of thing. And it's interesting you brought up those studies that show actually the satisfaction is no less if they've had less food. And in fact, I usually talk to clients about it. It would probably be more so, because I find that a lot of clients actually have a big sense of guilt when they know that they've overeaten, because they feel too full, they feel bloated, they feel sick, and they can't remember why they did it. They can't really remember what foods. It was almost like a kind of calorie haze. So they're like, yeah, I just saw Chris.
I've experienced a few of those in my time.
Yeah, like so have I. Like, Christmas is a calorie haze all the time. But even that in itself is like, it's our society that brings these situations upon us, isn't it? Like, over Christmas, we're expected to eat ourselves to a point of no return, because it's like what you do at Christmas. And you think, well, actually, when we look at the data now, that especially in the US, over periods of Thanksgiving and Christmas, people put on quite a bit of weight that then is maintained for the rest of the year. And that's why year on year, they're gradually getting overweight. We need to change our perception around what enjoyment means when it comes to food and social occasions, and having that self-discipline to actually slow down and be like, okay, I'm going to have a bit of everything, but a bit of everything, as opposed to all
everything.
of everything. As opposed to as much I can fit in my mouth now.
Exactly. And you're definitely right about that feeling of guilt. And I think most people experience that not due to the specific foods that they're consuming, especially if they're working, you know, with yourself or someone who has a good grasp of nutrition. Like, we know that there's no such thing as good or bad food, it's just good or bad diet overall, and it's all about context. So I find that clients who do feel guilty after eating, it's not necessarily because of their food choices, but more so because of the fact that they have overindulged, and that's not in line with their longer term goals. So I think keeping that short-term satisfaction, reins in, and being aware and keeping in mind your longer-term goals, that's going to be hugely important for reducing things like feelings of guilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, massively. As you said, it's the fact that they know that they've overeaten, they feel bad because of it, and then sometimes that potentiates more of it, which is weird. It's weird how that cycle can repeat itself. I was actually talking to a client yesterday, and this brings me on to the next question I wanted to ask you, actually, about sometimes when people are tracking calories, as much as we as practitioners can use that as a method to introduce people to this idea of flexible dieting, no such thing as a bad food, calorie limits, that kind of thing. What I find that a lot of the time people have calorie goals that they're trying to hit. When they're then put in a position like a social event, a party, traveling, holiday, insert copious food amounts here, they know that potentially they're going to struggle balancing their calorie limit. And so it's almost that law of having that abstract amount for that single day causes them then to go over it or to abandon the plan completely, because they're like, I'm either going to, if I'm going to go over the calories, I might as well leapfrog them and stuff my face as much as I can. So how do you manage that with clients, I guess, in terms of if they are using tracking, how do they then adapt to a foreign environment?
I think that will come down to, again, having that good foundation of knowledge where you can recognise what goes into a certain meal and the macros of that. So knowing your portion sizes as well would be important. But I think if someone's struggling to stick to, because you can obviously bank calories leading up to a certain occasion, but if they're struggling to stick to a higher amount, because that is something that you do find, like even people who are dieting, when they've got that one day that you've saved calories for, having that go ahead to eat more can lead them to spiral into consuming more and more, because you're including these kinds of foods that are new. And we know that palatable foods release dopamine, but so does novelty. Like we get dopamine release from novel situations. So if you're eating a new food, that obviously is going to you learn to enjoy it, which is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult to stop yourself from going too far. So if you're someone who really struggles with that, you could try eating similar foods to what you would already eat, when you are eating out. So opting for the chicken and veg, it's not very exciting. You're probably not going to go overboard on it. But only if that's something you struggle with, because obviously I'm all for enjoying the different cuisine, but you just got to have that element of self-control and also self-awareness to know whether you're someone who struggles with this, or if you're quite happy to stick to your calories and you're pretty good with that.
Yeah. Do you have people that still try to potentially track when they go traveling? Do they still try to put things in MyFitnessPal as best as possible, or do you find yourself saying, what tracking is like back home, so now let's apply more habitual based strategies to while you're away, or is it a mixture?
Yeah, it's definitely a mixture. It depends on the person, what they're like, and also what their goals are and what stage they are at. So if they've made a lot of progress and they're pretty happy, but also it depends where you're going as well, because if you're in Sydney and you're flying to Melbourne for the weekend, there's not a huge change, and you can just carry on tracking as normal. But one of my clients, he recently had a trip to India, went out for, it's a set menu when he was going out, so he had no control over the food choices. So what he does is he's just very good when he does have, when he is in control, so he'll opt for the high protein and get your veggies in then, so that you've got more leeway when it comes to something like a set meal, a set dinner where you've got X amount of courses. And I think having strategies in place like that, so taking advantage of when you've got the most control and making the better choices then. And then again, being realistic. So I do like to have my clients tracking at least for a certain period of time. But for example, when he has these meals out, I just say don't worry too much about tracking them, because what's the point? In my opinion, the benefit of tracking is the accuracy. If you've already got the education, it's an educational tool. Once you've developed that awareness, then the only benefit of it really is the accuracy and the precision. So if you have no control over the meal, you don't know what's in it, what's the point in going back into My Fitness Pal once you've eaten to try and guess what you had? You know, it's just extra stress when you've already eaten it anyway, so it's there, and I'm aware of what's going on, and I think that's the main thing as well. You know, so I know that any discrepancies in weight or things like that will be down to I had a meal out when it was a set menu and I didn't really know how to track it. It's like, fine, because I don't really see, if that's the case, there's not really much point when you've already got that awareness.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely depends on where people are at in their journey. And as you said there, it's like, let's make the best decisions we can when we're in fully control of our surroundings, and then strategize around not. So for people who are traveling and staying in hostels, if they're cooking 2 of their meals, they can make those meals very high protein, very high veg, low carb and fat, and then they've saved calories then for a potential meal out. And that works for people at home going to parties as well. As you've mentioned, you can implement intermittent fasting. You can then just stick to protein only, and then at the event itself, if it's a set menu, if it's a buffet, it's much more a case of like aim for protein and veg first, and then enjoy other things in moderation. Stop when you're full. Don't be a dick about it. Essentially, with the whole like overeating thing. There was a point that you then brought up quite well at the end of that, which I wanted to segue into, which I've now forgotten about with that last summary, which is really annoying. It was more a case of with your sense of no, it's gone again. Why is it gone? This is awkward. I'll cut this bit out, hopefully, if I edit it well. When
What did I say?
It's all right. You said something about it was set menus, traveling, the added stress of tracking, the accuracy of tracking.
Yeah.
Those were both really good points. I think it just comes back to that whole point of like, if you want to be accurate with something, you can track it. But then when you're going to be out and about, it's like, you're not going to try to track things after you've had that food. Like, you've already enjoyed it. So what's the point?
I think if you had, immediate and urgent goals, you just wouldn't put yourself in those situations. So that by traveling, if that's something that you don't have control over, you have to travel for work, then that's not as optimal. But then I think you can take comfort in the fact that, okay, I accept that this isn't optimal for progress. Now I'm just going to do my best. And by best and picking the best foods, I just mean whatever's in line with your current goal, and knowing, I think it's that acceptance really helps, remove that feeling of guilt. And I would say, if you're a fat loss client and you're traveling, you take the risk of not getting optimal results, and that's something that you just have to accept.
Yeah, and there's a difference there between accepting that something's not going to be optimal and doing still the best that you can, as opposed to throwing caution to the wind and just saying, screw it, it doesn't matter at all. And of course, you've noticed yourself through your own documentation that, like, when you're traveling, actually your steps are through the roof. And so things like non-exercise activity can be massively high. And so for a lot of people, actually, you can kind of say to them, your step's going to be a lot higher. You might find it a little bit easier to maintain or even lose weight, depending on what you do from a food side of things.
I think as well, especially in these different environments. So around Southeast Asia, we know that in Western countries that we live in, in a obesogenic environment with constant food queues are thrown in our face all the time, like supermarkets, things like that, just constantly surrounded by food. Whereas when you're traveling, if you don't have food in your accommodation because you're eating out, lots of overeating occurs in the evening and in the kitchen at home. When you're not living at home, you're reducing your exposure to those foods, and you do consume less because you are distracted, because you're in a new place, you're not thinking about food all the time, compared to when you're back at home. That, coupled with higher energy expenditure, as you say, some days I can easily hit 30,000 steps without even trying, just because you're exploring. You can hike in these places, there's so much that you can do. So higher energy expenditure gives you a bit more leeway in terms of eating. And when you're not snacking, because we know that the majority of snacks are quite energy dense, and also having your portions given to you, although usually eating out in a restaurant, portion sizes are larger than what you would typically consume, they're quite calorie dense as well. you can't go on and on. Whereas if you're at home and you've got access to the kitchen, you're relying on your own willpower there. That's the obesogenic environment, really. Whereas if you're traveling and you don't have access to that, it makes a huge difference. So you're not thinking about food so much. It's actually easier than people would expect to reduce your intake and also increase your output, which obviously bodes well for maintaining or even losing weight.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, it's a really good point. That whole like mindless snacking in the evening is where people massively go wrong. And then so actually when you're traveling, it's having that awareness of yourself of saying, okay, well, I'm going to have my main meals. I'm not really hungry enough to snack in between. I don't need to snack in between. You might have whey protein and beef jerky, things like that with you. You're walking everywhere and going all over the place. And then if you come back to those habits of being aware of what you're being fed, focusing on protein and vegetables, enjoying the food, but not being an idiot about being overeating, and being aware of the fat content of meals. It's like that then combined together should sort most people out. And then, as you said, it's finding the right gyms to go to, looking up the workouts that you want to do online, or having a coach there to help write them with you. So I think we've covered some really good points.
Yeah, for sure.
So for people out there who want to know more about you and your travels, or want to know more about Flex Success, where would be the best places for them to go to?
For myself personally, I'm probably most active on Instagram, so that's just at Shannon Beer, BWR_. Flex Success, we also have an Instagram page. We're very active on the story as well, so all the different coaches will be on the story throughout the week, and you'll get a feel for all of us through there, and that's just Flex Success. We also have a Facebook page at Flex Success, website flexsuccess.com.
.com.au, is it? .com.au?
Yeah, .com.au, yeah.
That's it. Flexsuccess.com.au.
That's it. We also have, a research review, we've got group coaching, online coaching. So there's so many different ways that you can, check us out. But a lot of content we post for free as well. So
yeah. As the fitness game's all about posting everything for free on the gram now, innit? As you and I both know. Cool. Well, then the last question, I guess, is how do you prefer your coffee?
Black, filter.
That is the right answer. That is the right answer. Even though this is called the Flat White Chronicles, that is exactly how I like mine as well. So Shannon, thanks again for joining me on the podcast. I think we had a great discussion there, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.